Star Trek has never been afraid to make bold fashion choices, whether it's the outdoor lingerie in the Next Generation episode Justice, the glamorous alien girls of the original series, or the graceful robes worn by the Vulcans. Meanwhile, the Starfleet Uniform offers insight into our evolving image of what the future might look like, depicting Starfleet as a utopian organisation of scientists, diplomats, and explorers. In the 1960s, this included women wearing super short mini dresses, an iconic look that would probably be criticised in a modern TV show. Starfleet's miniskirts were phased out in later spin-offs, perceived as a relic of a bygone era, but this issue is more complicated than you might think. In the 1960s, miniskirts were seen by many as a modern, empowering fashion choice. Meanwhile, the 1990s Star Trek shows found different ways to sexualise female characters, often with more uncomfortable costumes. In recent years, the Starfleet mini dress, also known as the scant, has been revived and reappraised as a more practical garment, beloved by cosplayers. It's also the focus of much discussion regarding gender roles in the Star Trek universe, as the franchise develops a more sophisticated understanding of gender and sexuality. So, what's the scant all about? Hi there, I'm Gavia Baker-Whitelaw. Welcome back to Behind the Seams, exploring the world of costume design. Premiering in 1966, Star Trek's original series combined speculative sci-fi with fun, episodic comedy drama, filmed on a low budget with plenty of enthusiasm. Bill Tice was the main costume designer, and the original uniforms were simple and eye-catching, designed to work both on black and white TVs and in full colour. In fact, a lot of the show's design choices revolved around the growing popularity of colour TV. Members of the command crew wear gold shirts, science and medical officers wear blue, and red uniforms indicate engineering, security, and communications officers. And while a few women did wear pants, the most prominent female characters, Lieutenant Uhura, Nurse Chapel, and Yeoman Rand, all wore mini dresses with long sleeves and tights underneath. But the miniskirts arrived thanks to a suggestion from Yeoman Rand actress Grace Lee Whitney, who wanted the women to look more fashion-forward, as was Bill Tice, who became known for designing revealing outfits for female guest stars. So Starfleet's women began to dress like the archetypal, single, sexually independent 1960s women, echoing the glamorized image of air hostesses at the time. Miniskirts already appeared in sci-fi imagery in the 1940s and 50s, symbolizing modernity and fulfilling a desire to see women's legs. By the time Star Trek arrived in the mid-60s, miniskirts were a mainstream fashion trend. Popularized by designers like Mary Quant, miniskirts were cool, youthful, and modern, tying in with the women's liberation movement and representing a departure from the restrictive trends of the 50s. It's actually no surprise that Starfleet's mini dresses came at the suggestion of a young woman. And in her autobiography, Uhura actress Nichelle Nichols struck back against the idea that these outfits were sexist or exploitative. Some thought it demeaning for a woman in the command crew to be dressed so sexily. It always surprised me because I never saw it that way. After all, the show was created in the age of the miniskirt, and the crew women's uniforms were very comfortable. Contrary to what many may think today, no one really saw it as demeaning back then. In fact, the miniskirt was a symbol of sexual liberation. More to the point though, in the 23rd century, you are respected for your abilities regardless of what you do or do not wear. This viewpoint is a great illustration of Star Trek's cultural legacy, where the show was groundbreaking and progressive in many ways, while occasionally feeling dated to modern eyes, especially when you don't have this historical context. Characters like Uhura and Yeoman Rand fit into a particular 1960s image of independence. A single woman who can make her own way in a male-dominated career while also being fun and sexy. We know from vintage Star Trek conventions that many fans embraced the mini-dress uniform, and it remains popular as a retro symbol of classic Trek. However, these costumes were phased out when Star Trek returned in the 1980s, as the franchise shifted to fit the times. While Star Trek includes numerous war storylines, Starfleet isn't meant to be an explicitly military organisation. It's more geared toward diplomacy and exploration, tying into the show's utopian ethos. That's reflected in the Starfleet uniforms, which usually avoid military imagery. The most overtly military uniforms appear during the original series movies, several of which feature Cold War themes. Then in 1987, the franchise developed a new aesthetic for the next generation, which was soon followed by Star Trek Voyager and Deep Space Nine. Contrasting Picard's diplomatic skills with Kirk's action hero image, the next generation aimed for a more peaceful and business-like atmosphere, with Picard's Enterprise resembling a sleek 1980s office building. The first season of The Next Generation was a transitional point for the franchise, with a new cast and crew figuring out how to update Star Trek for modern viewers. Showrunner Gene Roddenberry was still in charge, and Bill Tice also designed the new uniforms. Following a more subtle colour scheme, the new Starfleet outfits consisted of unisex jumpsuits, although some female characters still wore mini-dresses in early seasons, including Deanna Troi in the show's pilot episode. More importantly though, The Next Generation included a couple of men wearing the mini-dress uniform, aka the Scant. They only appeared as background extras, but it was a subtle cue that Star Trek's gender roles were moving with the times. The jumpsuit and the Scant were now canonically unisex items that crew members could choose to wear as a matter of preference. In theory, anyway. Behind the scenes, there was a continual tug of war regarding the portrayal of female characters. Many of the show's lead actresses have discussed their experiences with sexism and discrimination in the 90s, and this was very visible in Deanna Troi's costumes. As the ship's counselor, Troi didn't wear a typical Starfleet uniform for the first 6 seasons of the show, opting for tight, cleavage-bearing catsuits. Then in season 6, a new commanding officer ordered Troi to start wearing a uniform, a change that soon had an impact on the show's writing. According to actress Marina Sirtis, as soon as she stopped wearing sexy costumes, Troi immediately became more competent, with the writers giving her more meaningful dialogue.
I knew you'd encourage me.
It's a pretty grim story, highlighting some of the differences in attitude between Star Trek in the 60s and 90s. In the original series, the sexy uniforms were arguably a way to reassure viewers that these women were still attractive and feminine, while being competent experts in a futuristic workplace. Meanwhile, in The Next Generation, Deanna Troi often received a more limited role, while wearing sexier costumes than the more serious female characters like Dr. Crusher or the tough security officer Tasha Yar. The jumpsuit uniforms continued through the 1990s in Star Trek Voyager and Deep Space Nine, while the franchise also pushed the envelope with queer and transgender themes, most notably with DS9's Jadzia Dax. This era of costume choices illustrates the conflict between 1990s ideals about equality in the workplace and the reality that these shows were still controlled by male-dominated creative teams. For instance, while Voyager included far more meaningful screen time for women, there's speculation that the show's creators tried to balance out Captain Janeway's tough leadership role by introducing 7 of 9 with an overtly sexualized appearance.
My appearance is sufficient.
Sufficient, yes.
7 of 9's original catsuit costume was famously very uncomfortable to wear, making her yet another beloved Star Trek character whose role was beset by sexism behind the scenes. And when Star Trek Enterprise arrived in 2001, T'Pol became yet another female character wearing a skin-tight costume, while everyone else wore more sensible uniforms. The mini-dresses wouldn't return until the current era of Star Trek. Launched by J.J. Abrams in 2009, the Star Trek Reboot trilogy is pretty divisive. While these movies had their good points, J.J. Abrams didn't particularly enjoy or understand the core themes of the franchise. As a result, the 2009 reboot is a fun action blockbuster, but delivers a warped and often regressive view of what the original series stood for. This is particularly apparent in its depiction of women. This movie rewrites Captain Kirk as a frat boy who repeatedly hits on Uhura and disrespects his sexual partners. Very different from the original Kirk, who was promiscuous yet romantic, with a sympathetic and supportive attitude towards women. As for costume choices, the Star Trek Reboot uniforms are a great illustration of how a few contextual changes can make a big impact. The Reboot mini-dresses expose a lot more skin, with short sleeves and no tights underneath the skirts. In the original series, a character's Starfleet rank was illustrated using gold braid on the cuff of their sleeves, so by removing the women's sleeves, this film removes any sign of their place in the crew's command structure. Most importantly, in the context of a modern blockbuster, these uniforms have a different impact from their role in the 1960s series. Classic Trek was often cheesy and lighthearted, with costume choices that fit the tone, including some fairly silly outfits for the men as well. It was a product of 1960s pop culture. Meanwhile, the 2009 Star Trek is an action movie with a noticeably male-dominated cast. They're all performing action scenes involving realistic physical peril, and since Uhura is running around with bare limbs and a super short skirt, her costume creates a double standard. So instead of just being a nostalgic callback, the miniskirt begins to feel a little sexist. In my view, it would have made a big difference to just give the women sleeves and leggings, which is precisely what we see in the new Star Trek shows.
Everybody ready?
Yes, Captain.
These days, there's a new raft of shows airing on CBS and Paramount Plus, covering a variety of eras in the Star Trek timeline. Featuring diverse casts and creative teams, these shows include canonically queer, trans, and non-binary characters. And in terms of costume design, there's a lot to choose from. Star Trek Discovery begins about 10 years before the original series, introducing a sleek navy blue uniform with metallic accents for different Starfleet departments. Meanwhile, Star Trek Picard evolved its uniforms from the Next Generation, and the animated show Lower Decks takes place in the same era as the 1990s shows. A couple of female characters wear new versions of the scant in Star Trek Discovery, but while costume designer Gersha Phillips mentioned plans to make this a unisex uniform in 2018, this never really panned out on screen. Something similar happened with Strange New Worlds, which premiered to great acclaim in 2022. This show takes place on the Enterprise, a few years before Kirk became captain, and it features young versions of Spock, Uhura, and Nurse Chapel. Their uniforms echo the 1960s colour scheme, including a modern riff on the scant. Actress Rebecca Romaine personally requested this style of costume while playing First Officer Una Chin Riley, saying, "I actually want to make sure that Starfleet dress goes into action and turn it into a badass Starfleet dress, so it's not just like a flight attendant standing around on the Enterprise." But while several female characters wear the scant, it's only briefly seen on male crew members in the background, much like in The Next Generation. In the context of a show with progressive attitudes to gender and sexuality, it's interesting to see which clothes are perceived as genuinely gender neutral, reflecting real-life attitudes to fashion and gender presentation.
Oh no, you feel betrayed. I hate it when that happens.
In the US, pants are a unisex garment that used to have strongly masculine connotations, while skirts are still perceived as overtly feminine. This reflects the idea that women gain power and freedom by breaking into masculine environments, while it's still seen as shameful for men to adopt feminine traits. That belief is rooted in misogyny and provides the foundation for a lot of restrictive beliefs about gender. And the truth is that when you look at the styling of the current Star Trek shows, they're pretty much in line with these gender norms. Unlike previous eras of the franchise, none of the women in Strange New Worlds look like they're catering to the male gaze. The characters seem to be making styling choices to suit their own tastes, whether that's hair and makeup or the decision to wear pants or a skirt. By contrast, their male counterparts look far more conservative. If we envision Starfleet as an inclusive community in the 23rd century, it doesn't actually make sense for all the guys to have short hair, following plain, practical styles, while their female co-workers are more expressive. But the show is still restricted by real-life social constraints. Many viewers would find it shocking and transgressive for a character like Captain Pike to wear a minidress and leggings on the Starship Enterprise, and unless one of the lead actors actively pushes for it, I doubt this will happen on screen. So, in the grand tradition of futuristic sci-fi storytelling, this kind of world building emerges from our own contemporary tastes and sensibilities. Starfleet uniforms are still not genuinely unisex, because certain clothes are still heavily gendered in the real world. Thanks for watching Behind the Seams, and thanks so much for waiting. It's been a while since the last episode, and I'm really looking forward to making more. If you enjoyed this one, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one!